Welcome back to Personalist Manifestos. I'm Michael Morelli, the host of this ongoing conversation about contemplative revolution. In this episode, I'm speaking to someone by the name of Jonathan Lyonhart. Jonathan is a theologian, philosopher, author, and ordained minister. He sent me an email a while back, letting me know he's listened to this show and thought I might be interested in reading his new book, The Journey of God, Christianity in 6 Movements. I responded to his email saying something like, "Of course, send me your book. Let's do this." And here we are, Jonathan and I talking about stories, theology, philosophy, and a whole lot of other things, including inside baseball talk about living in Vancouver, the Canadian one, not the American one. Side note, if you have a book you think I should read, send me an email. Chances are I'll want to read it. And so with that, here's my conversation with Jonathan. I have Jonathan Lyonhart here for a conversation, and I want to make sure that I'm getting it correct. It is Lyonhart?
Yeah, it's pronounced Lyonhart. It's technically whatever I want it to be because it's not we made up the name. My last name was Lyon and my wife's last name was Hart. And when we got married, we legally fused them together because we felt like God would punish us for not taking advantage of that opportunity. So some people annoyingly insist upon saying Lyonhart. And I'm like, no, we invented this name. It is Lyonhart.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. So it's like a mashup. Instead of doing the hyphenated thing, you did a mashup. Now, can you legally do that?
You can, but it was far easier for her because the legal system, while it allows men to change their last name, is clearly not built for that to be an easy, streamlined process. So, and also I think the easy thing to do is hyphenate. That's an almost automatic thing. We didn't want to hyphenate. We wanted to actually combine. And so that actually took a long time. So it was a pain.
Well, it was worth it. I mean,
I feel so too.
I like the name. I think it's a good mashup. It sounds like the name of somebody who is a knight.
That was the goal, really, was self-aggrandizement. And so, yeah.
Nice. Okay, well, now that we've established how to pronounce your name and the origin story of your name, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, what do people need to know about Jonathan Lyonhart?
Yeah, so I am from Vancouver, Canada. I grew up basically downtown, right by the Cambie Street Bridge, where Monk McQueen's used to be. And I became religious in my teen years, decided to go do a Christian college in the US, met my wife there. We moved back up here. I did ministry in Vancouver at a Chinese Mennonite church for 5 years, which I think some of our background connection through the seminary. And so I was at Vancouver Christian Logos Church, which used to meet where Culloden was before, Culloden Church on 49th in Vancouver. Did that for 5 years. It was a blast. It's just a great group of people. Really enjoyed it. And then went and did further studies in the UK. And mid PhD, surprise, we had twins.
Wow.
And then COVID happened. So we've kind of just felt like we've just been holding on the last 5 or 6 years. And then I got a job in Illinois teaching at Lincoln Christian University, and then it closed because that's what's happening to theological education. And so then I got another job at the University of Jamestown, and this is my 2nd year teaching there, 5th year teaching in general. And so that's kind of our story. And my wife's also an academic. She's doing her PhD at the University of Oxford, which I try to promote how awesome she is as much as I can. So, because she really is awesome. So
I love that.
Check her out. She's doing cool stuff too.
Okay, and what's her first name so people can check out her work?
Madison Lyonhart. She is studying how the Vietnam War shifted evangelical views on masculinity in America. Because the Vietnam War is kind of a perceived loss, right? Like America comes in, kicks butt in World War II, we're the saviors of the world. And then Vietnam's a perceived loss. And how does evangelical masculinity counter that and sort of overcompensate post-Vietnam. So she's doing some cool, interesting stuff. She's pretty great. She's much better than me. You should have her on instead of me. So
well, maybe we can have a follow-up.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, so yeah, first of all, I just want to say that, yeah, we're talking a little bit of Vancouver inside baseball just because, we're both Vancouverites. And for those who are south of the border, like we live quite close to Seattle, just to position us geographically here. And I'm sure we can get into some Vancouver lore, but maybe we'll earmark that for another time or an offline conversation. So this is a question that I ask all the time, because I'm just curious how people end up in theology.
Yeah. So growing up in Vancouver, I mean, least church city in North America. I think it still is that. I don't know. Maybe other cities are giving them for money. I didn't grow up initially going to church. That happened about halfway through childhood. And I think I probably would have ended up rejecting it because I had a lot of questions, about whether it made sense. And I think the cultural environment I am was very antithetical to Christianity. But there was a youth pastor right at the end of high school. His name was Art Matheny, who started at a local church. And he was just such a solid, consistent, loving dude that he won me over. I'd like to pretend I was intellectually, I studied the scriptures and I decided it was correct. Nope. The man just loved the crap out of me until I was like, yeah, this is an unreal love that must point to something ontological about the universe. If this man is capable of as much love as he is capable, love must be a real thing in reality. He just convinced me of that. And then I decided to go into ministry, went basically to a Bible college. And I think through that process, I was starting to realize there's some really weighty theological, philosophical debates here, getting into the origins of the universe, free will, the meaning of life, morality, beauty. And I guess I'd always been drawn to those big questions. I was the kid in the back of the class not paying attention because I was trying to figure out what's at the edge of the universe. And if you shot something over it, what would be, and I think I unintentionally realized that this was basically the thing I'd been doing my whole life, but there's an actual discipline and you could pay to study it and potentially even get paid to do it, philosophy is not a great discipline to go into if you want to get paid. But it worked out for me. So I'm getting paid to sit and think all day and it's the best thing ever. So
yeah. I love that it starts with relationship. There's a quote that I've been thinking a lot about lately. I came across it. It's from Maya Angelou, and she says that people won't remember what you said, people won't remember what you did, but people will remember how you made them feel. And I feel like what we say and do is connected to how we make people feel. But I do think it's so interesting. You end up in this discipline, you end up in teaching, and it's so easy to think sometimes that the most important stuff we say is just how well we say things when we're in front of a group of people, or how well we turn that phrase when we're writing, when actually it's the relational element that causes all the other stuff to stick or not stick.
I think you're 100% right. And I think it might have to do with the subjective objective labels that we've bought into. Reason is objective, feelings are subjective. And it's well, if God is love, then the absolute, the objective thing that exists at the heart of all existence is love. And it is that relationship, right? The Trinity is relational. So how could you ever come into the inner chambers of truth without that love in your heart, right? I think it's, even just on a theoretical level, it makes no sense to access truth without that personal, intimate side as well. If you have a religious worldview, right?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you reached out and said, "Hey, would you be interested in checking out my new book?" And I have it right here, The Journey of God, and I see it also above your head, sort of floating there. So before we get into how this book came about, I want to jump right actually to a deep cut question that's a part of the book. So I want to ask about your reference to the film Life is Beautiful that you mention in a footnote near the end of the book. The reason why I just want to get straight to it is because I feel like this will really set the tone for our conversation, set the tone for the book. If just get people interested in it, based on what we're going to talk about. And also, honestly, selfishly, I want to say that this is my favorite film of all time. I have a lot of favorite films, of course. Like it's difficult for me to choose a favorite anything, but if I were to pick one, Life is Beautiful would be my favorite. So that's what I say when people are like, what's your favorite movie? I pick that one. So this is what you write about it. And I want to sort of riff on this a little bit. So this is what you say. If you only watch one part of Life is Beautiful, it's a comedy. If you only watch the other part, it's a tragedy. But it's a mixture of both parts into one cohesive story that makes it work so well and ring so true. I think this helps explain why I love the movie so much. So for those who aren't initiated into the wonder of this film, it's a love story set during World War II, just kind of in the lead up to it, in Italy. So it's filmed in that Italian neo-realist style, and it's about a character who we find out is Jewish, who falls in love with a woman. They get married, they have a child, and that's like the comedy piece. And then all of a sudden, the main character and his son get shipped off to a concentration camp. And the wife follows, even though she's not Jewish, she follows in order to stay connected to her husband and son and maybe figure out a way to contact them. So I remember the first time my wife and I watched this movie, like we were dating, I was like, you have to see this movie. It's my favorite film ever. And I didn't give her any of that like preview. So she's like, oh, this is a beautiful love story. And then it's just like, hard right angle turn into, and now we are in tragedy territory. But all of this sort of reminds me of J.R.R. Tolkien's concept of eucatastrophe, where like it's the storyline that has comedy elements and tragedy elements, and it ends with a resolution, but it's not tied up in a nice bow. And the characters who live to the end, like they live with scars. So I just want to like put this out there to you and say like, this is the sort of writing that you're doing in this book. And I wanted to ask, like, did you have this idea of eucatastrophe in your mind as you were writing this chapter, as you were thinking about this movie? Or maybe you hadn't heard of that concept before, but I had a sense that you are like, you're a Tolkien guy. I just,
I'm just going to
could tell.
turn my camera slightly. And there's Sauron up there.
Yeah.
But now I have to actually know what I'm talking about. And that's, so I've bluffed here. No, I didn't think specifically of catastrophe. It's an aspect of Tolkien that I'm wrestling with. I teach a God on the Holocaust class, and I'm very much someone who thinks the problem of evil can't be answered. I think we can find plausible reasons to remain religious despite not having an answer. But I really think attempts to make sense of it just fall flat. And so I've wrestled with the eucatastrophe concept and whether it's how it's different from God's role in history in a traditional sense. And I don't dismiss it, and particularly because I think Tolkien comes from such a place of suffering that it means something that he's saying it. Father dies when he's basically an infant. He's orphaned, I think, at 12. His mom dies. He then makes friends, loses all of them in World War I. And the one friend that doesn't die, they're distanced. They never quite reconcile. And then lives through World War II and writes his Legendarium in the midst of that. Like, I don't take it lightly when he says history has a hand over it, or sort of these interrupting meanings. I'm not sure I feel like it settles the issue in an intellectual sense, but almost in an emotional sense. And this is coming back to where we were before. The fact that someone like Tolkien can get to the end of his life and still believe God was somehow involved in these events, that that matters to me, because I respect Tolkien almost more than I respect myself and my own ability to figure this out. And if he was comfortable with that, I can be a little more comfortable with it. So yeah, I wasn't thinking of it specifically when I was talking about Life is Beautiful, but I think it could apply. And yeah, no, I'm glad that you love it so much too. It's one of my favorite movies. I always think of my mother when I watch it. We watched it together when we were young, and um, when I taught that in my class, we watched Life is Beautiful in the God and Holocaust class. After we watched it the first time, I stood up in front of the class to do the post talk, and I just wept for like a full 2 minutes, and the class was just watching me weep. And it was like, oh shit, you're not supposed to do this, or maybe this is what teaching is missing. I don't know, but that movie just breaks me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because the humor's there. I think the brightness makes the darkness so much worse, and the darkness makes the lightness so much brighter. And I just break down every time I see it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that, getting into the sort of plot of the story, and if you're mad about spoilers, like the film's been out, I don't know, since like the late 90s. So yeah, so
Yeah,
you missed the boat on that one. But I think what you're referencing to is probably what makes the film resonate so much, is that in order for the father to protect his son in the concentration camp and keep him hidden, he has to convince his son that it's a game, that it's all a game, and that if he can stay hidden, then they'll get a reward at the end. And there's just these scenes where the father is doing like backbreaking labor, but he sees his son watching him and pretends like he starts walking like a clown and goofing around in order to just like protect his son. And there's something about it. I think a lot about Julian of Norwich's idea of laughing at the devil, like even in something as hellish and demonic as a concentration camp, the love of between the father and the son can still produce comedy, and it's not in a trite way at all. Anyway, people should watch the film. But that was going to be my follow-up question after.
No, I want to spend the rest of this episode talking about the film, Michael. You can't do this to me.
I'm sorry. Well, no, I want to make you cry. That's my. I want to make you. I want to make you weep. But so you kind of already answered my follow-up question after sort of laying the groundwork here. Is I wanted to hear your perspective on, like, to what extent do you think this storyline in Life is Beautiful, or this idea of eucatastrophe, describes well the Christian story about creation, fall, redemption, eschaton, these sorts of things. But maybe you can flesh that out a little bit more, because you did hint at like, I don't know if I want to go that far to say that it all works out in this way, that you want to hold back a little bit when it comes to things like the problem of evil and how that problem gets dealt with ultimately, not just at the end, but now as well.
Yeah, I think there are decent answers Christians can give to the problem of evil here and now. But I do think a lot of our attempts to make sense of it are ends justifies the means arguments. We don't quite understand why God allows this here and now, but at the end, and I think even the free will argument is an ends justifies the means. God allows the ends of evil to be possible the means in order to allow the greater end of human freedom. And I think I like those, but I think the problem with them is the end hasn't come. We don't know the end yet. And so what that is an appeal to a mystery that is eschatological. And in that sense, the story, the sixfold structure of Christianity, doesn't solve it, but it does gesture towards, I think, what needs to be there in order for there to even be the possibility of resolution, which is an end. There's a final piece to the story that we are a part of that hasn't come about yet. And I think stories that lack that can't make the eschatological appeal to mystery, because they think that here and now, everything will be resolved. They have an overly imminent view of our abilities to know and figure out. And I would say I don't know where your audience is, so I don't want to just throw out all these terms, but I would say that's almost an intellectually over-realized eschatology, right? And so I think the Christian story doesn't solve it, but it gives a narrative in which it makes sense that we can't yet solve it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you need.
Yeah,
So
I teach a theology of suffering course, and
yeah,
that's basically the move that I make. John Swinton's book, Raging with Compassion, really changed the game for me in terms of theodicy, where um, he opens that book and says, the classical question of theodicy is, if God exists, why is there evil in the world? Does that mean that God is good but can't, deal with it? He isn't powerful enough to solve it, or does it mean God is powerful enough to deal with the problem but doesn't because God is less than good? And he just says, like, the Bible actually doesn't have a lot to say on the why question in terms of why suffering and evil exists beyond Genesis 3 and the fall, right? And the consequences of the fall. Um, there's Job, um,
the
which
non-answer of Job.
the non-answer of Job. And I actually pair this with James Cone in Spiritual and the Blues and elsewhere, where Cone says that Job doesn't get an answer, he doesn't get an explanation, he gets revelation. So it's the presence of God that is the answer. So it's not just God showing up and saying, like, did you create the heavens and the earth? Were you there? Were you there? Were you there? It's actually Job at the end of God's, response says, I've heard about you before, but now I've seen you with my own eyes. And that's the answer, is like divine self-disclosure is the answer to the problem of evil. Not like, here's a systematic explanation of the mechanics of evil and suffering and how I'm dealing with it, but here is me in front of you. And I right. And so I'm like, that's much more compelling in some ways, but there is also this mystery element to it that still causes me, who wants an answer to every question, including like, why do awful things happen to good people? There's still like a dissatisfaction, but I think that actually is an indication of the sort of eschatological tension that we're in, which is like,
Yeah.
we're on the other side of the resurrection and we are waiting the return of Jesus and the sort of total resolution, wiping away of every tear, death will be no more, sickness will be no more. So like, for those who believe, we hope that that is going to be fulfilled. We believe it. And yet we still see awful things happen. And there's this desire to explain it in a satisfying way. But Swinton's point is like, does that ever actually deal with the real problem of suffering? Whereas the presence of God given to us in God's Son, that helps us get through the most difficult of moments. So that's how I wrestle with it. And so it's more of like, here's how much we can say, and here's the point where we need to be silent and wait for God to show up.
I love that twist that you're pointing out at the end of Job, that as much as it's a non-answer in words, it is an answer in terms of presence.
Yeah.
And if you think of words as almost a secondary, lower level attempt to put into words the presence of the one who is truth itself, like to solve it in words, you are never going to be able to fully solve it in words, because the point is that God is more than those words, and you're encountering the one who is truth itself. Like, I don't even know if there's a possible world in which it could be solved, right? Like, it's not like a different world that God would create and there's no problem of evil. I don't even know if it's possible to solve it fully without just encountering the one who is truth, because that's what the words are supposed to do, edge you towards that. But at some point you put down the signs and you go to the one who is directed, the signs are directing you to, right? Like, maybe the only answer we'll get, not even here and now, but in the end, in heaven, is the presence of God.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, it's not a cop-out. That's an explanation in words would have only pointed you to him and his presence in the end anyway, right?
Let's rewind and go to the typical question that I ask when someone's got a new book out, which is, what prompted you to write The Journey of God with such themes as the one that we just worked through here?
Fame, money, women.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
No.
Exactly. How's that going?
Yeah. I think I've made about $20.
Oh,
So,
nice. That's
like
good.
5 years of work, $20. I don't even know if that's a percentile or yeah. No, I think this book, it was the most naturally emerging one of all the ones I've written. Like, because as often, I sit down and I map something out and then I intend to write it, and it's a thing. But this one initially started as sermons at my church in Vancouver, transitioned to lectures, and then just sort of slipped those lectures in as chapters of the book. And it just, and I had to rework some things and tweak it. But in some ways, it was something that I've been wrestling with for about a decade. And these are kind of my big picture understandings of what Christianity is that I tried to give to my church and that I try to give to my students in our Intro to Christianity class at university. And for me, it was my attempt to take the biggest ideas and make them as simple as possible and as fun and enjoyable and story driven as possible. And I think in that way, it's probably the one that most reflects me. And yeah, because it just sort of happened. I didn't sit down and plan to write it. It just arose out of me over the years. So
Yeah, I really like that. I just had a conversation with a colleague, actually two colleagues last week, where we were just talking about the process by which you come to write a book now. After you do the cursory turn your doctorate into a monograph thing. I don't know about you or other people listening, but the way that I find myself researching now is just letting like what I need to teach and speak on for like conferences drive what I'm reading, and then just letting that sort of like fill me up and churn in my subconscious until all of a sudden it reaches a critical mass and it outflows, and there it is. There's this idea for a book, and that includes things like sermons, that includes workshops, whatever.
yeah.
I feel like there are people out there who have research plans that are really sort of like, this is what I'm reading, and I need to have it read by this point. And I'm like,
Yeah.
even
Who
if
are you people?
Yeah, who are you people, and how do you have the time to actually stick to those? So I'm taking the more sort of organic, pragmatic approach of like, let's just throw it in a barrel and let it ferment, and then see what happens as it ages. And it sounds a little bit like you, like it's just been sort of a sort of process by which it starts with sermons, and then sermons that transform into classes, and then classes that you test material out with these groups and see what the response is, and then it produces this. So you arrive at 6 movements. So each chapter has a movement representing the sort of overarching story of God, the journey of creation with God. So do you want to summarize those 6 movements and those primary themes of the book to give people an understanding of what you're up to?
Yeah. So the movements are creation, fall, nation, redemption, church, end. Creation, God creates it. I get into doctrines of creation, really emphasize the goodness of creation, which is something I think Christians have lost in our overemphasis upon heaven and the soul to the detriment of earth and the body. I think God created it and called it good. And so I'm really trying to establish a firm doctrine of creation. Then fall, get into what the fall means. And how that plays out, not just on a personal level, like I feel guilty now, but like socially, how does that impact economic, social, political structures, right? Like, how does the fall permeate everything humanity touches? And I try to explore that. And then I spend a lot of time in the book on nation, because I think the Old Testament is often glossed over. Like a lot of people, they spend some time in the first 3 chapters of Genesis, then they jump to the New Testament, right? Like, okay, God made it, then it fell, and then Jesus came and fixed it, right? But no, the Jewish nation's in there, right? Like there's the whole Abraham and his descendants. And so I spent a lot of time in there. And I think that was actually my favorite section almost, because it's where you really get to know the God who is being, goodness, and beauty itself and justice itself. As this Jewish community tries to work out how God is not a finite created idol, he's more transcendent than that, and yet we can have a relationship with this one who is transcendent. I mean, that's a really interesting tightrope that they're trying to walk there, and I think it only really does make sense fully in the fourth act of redemption, the fourth movement, when Jesus comes. The one who is eternity enters time. The transcendent becomes immanent, and fuses those in his humanity and divinity, and comes to undo the effects of the fall of Act 2. So Act 2 sets the plot problem, and Act 4 begins to resolve it. But it's not fully resolved yet, and the resolution isn't just God. He's not just going to force the resolution on us. He gives us the chance to participate in it, and that's Act 5, church. Movement 5 is when Jesus leaves and his spirit comes down, but the spirit isn't like just doing miracles all the time. The spirit is in you. It's in the community. It's in the church. God is undoing the fall through the community. And yet, at the same time, that's never going to fully be realized here and now on earth until Movement 6, the end. And I think sometimes when people forget that Movement 6 is not yet, they think the church is heaven on earth, and it's not. The church is a seed of what is to come, but it's still deeply tainted by Movement 2, the fall. The church is a messy, crazy, terrifying thing that is sometimes beautiful, sometimes amazing. She's the bride of Christ, and she's beautiful, but she's also capable of some really terrifying things. And we forget that when we forget that Act 6, Movement 6, has not yet come. End. And the end is when the ideal really does become real, when the perfection of heaven comes down to earth and all that was meant to be finally is. And until that point, we're only grasping for that perfection. And anyone who pretends to have it or have absolute authority on earth is a cult leader who needs to repent, So
I think when you see a chapter titled Nation in a book that's about, the 6 primary movements of God's story, there's a little bit of pause, at least for me, just given the resurgence of nationalisms and, Christian nationalism and so on. But that's not what you're doing. You are saying God chose a particular nation, Israel, through which other nations would be joined, as sort of a new nation made up of all the nations, every tribe, tongue, and nation, right? Through the other acts, right? The arrival of God's Son. And so you are saying, yeah, God chose a particular group of people in a particular point in time, but it is God's work through those people for all people that is the primary theme, not it's on this group or any one nation to usher in the kingdom. They are just the media through which God is working to reconcile all creation to God's self. And anyone who's trying to hasten that reconciliation, especially through violent means, that is not God. That is the idol that you're talking about or gesturing to.
Yeah. And I don't know if you were gesturing at all towards present day Israel there, but if you were, I was picking up on on those as well. Because there's a lot of Christians in America who think like we need to usher in the kingdom of God by how we treat present day Israel and that nation, because it's necessary for the end to come about, which may actually be as much of an attempt to force the end as like they critique communism for being.
Yeah. I wasn't necessarily like self-consciously gesturing to it. I think I was more just generally, I had in mind any instance in which a nation is being used, not even just for like a theological commitment, but actually a geopolitical strategy baptized in suspicious theology. I think that's more what I have in mind. And of course, current events.
You didn't want me to drag you into the most controversial subjects of the day?
Oh, no. That's not it. I'm not actually like trying to sidestep or back away. Okay, good. Because if you've listened to this show enough, you'll know that Michael doesn't shy away from much.
Oh, yeah. And if you've listened to any of my stuff, you'll know that everything is a joke to me all the time. So if I seem like I'm insulting you, I am playing.
Oh, no, I didn't feel insulted. Like, getting into it, I think there are two ditches. One, I think in this particular case, is like over identification with Israel, for the reasons that we're talking about, whether it's like theological commitment that's blind, willfully or just like unconsciously blind to the atrocities of what's happening. And whether that's like for theological reasons or for like geopolitical strategies and power reasons, both I think are problematic. Or there's the other side where it's like, this supersessionism idea where the church is like, don't worry, Israel, we got it from here. You're
Yeah.
saying. I think neither of those are actually like honoring the story of scripture. Like, it matters that God chose Israel. It matters that God worked through Israel. It matters that like when the canon was being formed, we just didn't do away with all that literature, bearing witness to who God is and what God's desires for the world are. And so if we don't choose either ditch, and we simply say, okay, what do we actually see in scripture? Things go wrong when any nation thinks that it's their job to usher the kingdom on earth and starts bowing down to idols and starts getting violent in order to make that happen. So in my way, it's just kind of like my best attempt at speaking prophetically to any nation, Israel included, that uses violence to gain power or usher something in, that God says, like, the ways in which I want to bring my plan to fulfillment um, doesn't require the suffering of
Yeah.
innocent people.
I think you put it really nicely. Those two ditches that you don't want to fall into. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes sense. Like, Christianity does just replace Israel and toss it aside. And yet what we're not tossing aside is a nation that throughout the entire Hebrew Bible is constantly being critiqued by its prophets. And so even being the chosen people does not mean you're heaven on earth in a full sense. Like, there is critique. My heart has been broken recently about
Yeah.
what's happening. And I just
Well, yeah.
I feel it's hard to even sleep right now. I don't know. Maybe I just need to get over that. But so
No, I think if our hearts aren't broken, and if we don't lose a little bit of sleep over this and other really awful things happening in our world, like, we're not looking closely enough, or we've become too comfortable.
yeah.
But yeah, I think you're exactly right. And even the sages of Israel, like, it seems like they're inspired most by the Spirit of God to like start writing stuff down, not when things are going amazing, but when things are going rough.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
in and of itself bears witness to what we're talking about, is like, um right down to when Israel becomes Israel, which is Jacob being renamed. The name means to struggle after God. So to be
Right.
chosen is to struggle, to labor. And it's like, if that's what it
Yeah.
means to be chosen, maybe I'd rather not be, right?
Yeah. Seems like he had a really nice life, without all of the turmoil. Like, Jacob
Mm.
had a lot of issues. Maybe it might have been better not to have been chosen.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
no.
Maybe. That's just like the to me, the classic Hebrew irony at play, and the humor of it, but also like the devastating, maybe even apocalyptic humor. I want to go back to the opening of the book and write something. And I actually, like, I'm not just blowing smoke here, but I was like, this is one of my favorite intros that I've read in a book for a while. You say, I was a boy in desperate search of a story, not merely to lose myself in entertainment, but to find myself in a narrative. I think I was trying to glimpse a bigger journey in which to locate myself, my character arc, and what I was or was not scripted for. And while 1,000 years ago I may have struggled to fit into the prevailing story stained in glass at the local cathedral, my much more contemporary problem was the exact opposite. There were 1,000 stories coming all at once in ever-multiplying mediums and screens, often with inconsistent visions, morals, aesthetics, and philosophies. The reason why I like that is, number one, it's an honest like account of sort of what life was like for you growing up. But I also think in you sharing that, there are a lot of people today who relate to these reflections, not only in the past, but also in the present. So what would you say to someone who is experiencing the desperation and disorientation that you're describing in what I just read?
I would say if you found anything to help you figure it out or navigate it, please let me know. No, I I feel like I have no I mean, this is the end isn't here yet. I don't have a perfect answer to it. I feel like a lot of the stuff I was holding on to keep my faith amidst all of these alternatives has fallen away. But there is something someone said, and that I think the best churches do say over and over again, which is just hold tight to Jesus. Um, and I think as I've doubted everything else and felt all of these doubts and other worldviews posing very difficult and legitimate questions, the only thing that's totally tethered me is Jesus is freaking awesome.
Hmm.
And even if I'm struggling with all these other questions, this man, this character, I buy it. I believe him.
Hmm.
And I think that's the only thing I've been able to hold on to. Uh, Otherwise, I mean, frick, Hinduism, if you look at Brahman and some of the stuff they're doing there, it's very hard. Like, I'm very attracted to that. And I think the more that society globalizes, we're going to have to face the onslaught of worldviews, not just in our Western postmodern, I hate that term, but, uh, you know, post scientific revolution age. Cause, we're facing worldviews, but they're still Western, right? As the 21st and 22nd century really begin to globalize, we're going to be encountering even more of everything. And I don't totally know how to do that or what the answer is. But I've just been staying close to Jesus amidst it and trying to learn about others and be open to the other, precisely because I think the beauty of the Trinity is that God is self and other, that there is that openness to otherness and difference and diversity because our God is the one who is one and three, unified yet diverse at the same time. And so I think the Christian ontology, um, and I think Jesus, as part of that, give us a solid place to put one foot while we encounter with the other foot the world, and to neither stop encountering the other or to lose that grounded foot at the same time. So that might be what I would say. I don't want people to shut. I think a lot of what we're doing is, okay, the world is becoming too big and all at once, and so we need to go back to good old fashioned truths and shut down and close off the other. I don't want to do that, but I also don't want to lose myself in the otherness, because it's learning about all these other worldviews and perspectives. It's easy to have no idea what you think of anything anymore. And anyone who says otherwise hasn't really felt the weight of it, right?
Hmm.
So for me, it's staying close to Jesus, and because Jesus is there, not being afraid to go into those spaces of otherness, because he's there with you. I don't know. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it
And
does.
it's not an answer. It doesn't solve anything, man.
No, that's okay. I feel like you and I incline to non-answer answers, or answers that produce more questions. I've actually had students say that before, and I'm okay with it. I tell myself it's rabbinic, and then it makes me more okay with it. But I think what I hear you getting at in regards to the awesomeness of Jesus, is presence. His presence matters. God is not distant and aloof to all of these disorienting realities, including the stories that there's the barrage of in our time. But God always seems to draw in and be present within them and journey through them with us. And in the Gospels, we get a vision of a God who comes to us and is constantly present, but also giving very surprising responses, or engaging with the dominant perspectives in quite surprising and unexpected ways. So, you know, the people that seem to be most frustrated by Jesus in the Gospels are like the religious people who are supposed to be the ambassadors for this God. and yet like they're choosing the way that you were describing. It's like, no, like we can't compromise, we can't change, like this is the way you do it, and we're gonna shove out anybody who doesn't hold to this perspective and this law and this way of doing things. And yet Jesus doesn't seem to really tolerate that type of perspective. He seems to be more interested in spending time with like the people who are pushed to the side and be like, well, what do you think? And
Yeah.
tell me more about that. Or what is it that you want from me? And it's those folks who actually, end up walking with him. And I think that really like speaks to when Jesus shows up, there is a sort of awe or fear maybe that one experiences, but there's, you know that he's present when that fear is no longer ruling you anymore. And I think that is something that a lot of people need, and I definitely need, and seems to be quite singular about what this God offers us today. So that's what I'm hearing in what you're saying.
Yeah, I refuse to let go of Jesus, but the Jesus I refuse to let go of is constantly expanding what we mean by God and who's included. And
Mhm.
I mean, I think it's impossible to read the New Testament honestly and not say that. And so, yeah, I think there is something unique about him, but at the same time, as you said, he's constantly making things bigger than religious people want it to be.
I want to talk about the singleness of Jesus and how you approach it in your book. So you say Jesus knows family is important and can bring us to God, but he also knows it can become an idol that gets between us and God. Much like nuclear power itself, family can be amazing until suddenly it isn't. What was going on in Jonathan's brain when he was writing that? Because I have all sorts of thoughts on the singleness of Jesus, and I do mini sermons on it often when I teach and or preach. But I want to know what Jonathan thinks about this before I throw my perspective into this thing.
Yeah, I think family's great. I think there's resonances of the Trinity in the family. I think there's something about eternity that's captured in time through the family. And yet, any finite thing can become an idol if we make it higher than all that God is, right? Like it's one reflection of the divine. It's not all that the divine is. And I think, especially in America, I, I almost want to use the language of heresy. I think we have elevated the family to an idolatrous level. And there is a paragraph that got cut through the editing process that I still am mad it got cut, right in that section where I specifically attack James Dobson and focus on the family, which feels a little weird because he just died this week. I think Christians in America in particular, and I know you're in Canada, but I'm in America, so this is what I'm dealing with right now. But I think America tends to export its values all over the place, right?
Oh,
I think they have elevated the family so much so that the only things we care about are any potential threats to the family and the nuclear family. So abortion, child rearing, homosexuality, transgenderism. I'm not going to tell people what to think on those issues, but I will say if you think that that's what it means to be a Christian, and that's like these are the battlefields that are the primary ones, like this is what we need to be fighting on instead of, loving and bringing the grace of Jesus. Like, I think we have elevated the family to such a high point that we've lost sight of God. And I would say I think it's idolatry. And I think, yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. Um, and I think the singleness of Jesus is essential to recover. Not because family isn't good, but because God's goodness is reflected in lots of different ways, and family is one of them. But I think the singleness of Jesus is also one of them, and the singleness of Paul. And I actually got to live with a single guy who had explicitly said, "I'm going to be celibate," and I think he still is now, like 20 years later. So he meant it. Maybe he was just a dork and needed a religious legitimation of it. But no, people were interested, and I think that impacted my worldview a lot. That experience of living with him for a year or two, to just deconstruct that idolatrous view of the family that we're we're really guilty of now. And I think it can explain a lot of the predicament we're in right now. I think it can even explain Trump. If you follow the thesis of Dumais in Jesus and John Wayne, Trump is not an aberration from Christian evangelicalism. He was the inevitable end of the type of masculinity and gender dynamics that we've been worshiping all along.
What you're getting at in terms of the singleness of Jesus and Paul is a key part of the mini sermon I preach, which is also about the idolatry of marriage, I think, in North American evangelicalism, both the American and the Canadian kind, which is like in the moment that Jesus is asked about divorce, like he talks about marriage and he of course he goes back to Genesis, but then he also talks about eunuchs, people who are
Yeah.
born eunuchs, people who are forced to become them, and people who choose to be eunuchs for the kingdom. And he's basically identifying in that moment as one of those people, right?
Yeah.
And Paul, it's like also, stay celibate. For those who can't control your desires, okay, maybe get married, but you know, haven't y'all heard? Jesus says that there won't be marriage in
Yeah.
heaven, right? So all of those things kind of sent a rocket into like the view of the family and like marriage at that time, but also our own of like any type of marriage will not completely complete you, and it's not a salvation issue. And so we've just sort of skipped over those passages. And so one of the things that I think I've seen when you just bring this up with students, especially like the undergrads that I teach, is like when I talk about this, you can just see them like take a moment and like have a sigh of relief of like, oh my gosh, like I'm not a failure if I'm not married by this point. Like this isn't a salvation issue. It just takes so much pressure off. Again, it 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 creates a space for the love of God, whatever our relational status is, to pour in,
Yeah.
and all the fear about sort of checking all the counsel for biblical manhood and womanhood boxes just to like dissipate. And even for those who check all those boxes, like there's this fear implicitly that people find out that we don't actually reach that that vision anyway. Like nobody totally checks all those boxes, and even if they do, that's like there's this terror that they're going to slip up or whatever. And
No,
yeah, that's just not the way that God envisions relationship.
I think you're totally right. I think it's a deeply pastoral issue, and I think it cuts to the heart of pretty much everyone. It's I think it's often when we talk about gender, we think of it as a woman's thing.
Hmm.
Like women have to do this, and even if you're progressive on that, you tend to think I'm progressive for women. They get to do these roles and not be restricted. But our views of masculinity are also incredibly inhibiting for men. Like growing up, I never felt like I fit in with the masculine crowd. I always felt very unsafe in the locker room. I never felt, and I think it cuts to for many of us, those types of things cut to the deepest part of who we are. And finding another mate is a way to legitimate our own identity, right? Like, oh, if I get a girlfriend or a boyfriend, then I've reached the peak masculine or feminine identity I'm supposed to have. And it's like, no, your identity is in Christ. Everything else is secondary, and we can talk about it, but
I'll never forget. I didn't get married until I was like 27, and I had finished seminary and I was interviewing for like pastoral roles and not being married.
yeah.
It, it, I was just like an anomaly. It's like you're interviewing for this pastoral role and you're not married yet. Like, are you like have you not told us about some divorce or like have you chosen
Yeah.
to be celibate for whatever reason? And and nobody would really like come out and ask it directly. They'd just be like, so
Yeah.
what's your living situation? I'm like, oh, I got a roommate. Like, well, what does your roommate do? It's like, he's a policeman. Like, what? Like, it's
Yeah.
just this weird thing of like, it just was sort of outside the framework of like, if you're a pastor, you're male, you got to be married and you have to fit this sort of mold. And maybe that's just not everybody's story. Maybe they meet somebody later. And honestly, like 27, 28 is not that, like, not
No,
that
especially not in
old.
Vancouver.
No.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's even if people accept it, they're still accepting it as like a deviation from the norm. Like, oh yeah, we were able to get over you being single. And it's like, well, if you're reading the New Testament, maybe the norm, like 1 Corinthians 7, Paul talking
Yeah.
about celibacy, maybe the assumption is everyone is celibate, and then the deviation is, oh, you couldn't keep it in your pants, so you got married, right? Like
Exactly.
maybe it needs to be flipped.
Yeah, actually, that's the biblical view. I should have been put to the top of the short list for those interviews. So people aren't reading the Bible. One thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately is the theme of absence and presence. We talked a little bit about this, but there's a quote that stood out to me on this subject. You say, I could point out that we are never alone in our sufferings, for Christ is on the cross next to us, and the Spirit is going through it with us and within us. But that only addresses the emotional problem of suffering, not the intellectual problem of it. It's not so much the suffering piece and the intellectual problem that draws my attention. It is more this reality that I've been pondering a lot. That, as people have heard us talk, like you and I both are at a place where we believe in the awesomeness of Jesus. We talk about the presence of God and how awesome it is and how close it is. And yet, if I'm being totally honest, and I don't think I'm alone in this, like there's that cognitive belief, okay? That hope that these things that I believe in are true, even when it seems like they're not. And despite all this cognitive belief, despite the fact that I've committed a large portion of my life to teaching these truths that I think are true, do I experience that presence of God in the day-to-day? I don't know. This is where this theme of dread I've been thinking a lot about comes into play. Is there's doubt, right? There's doubt in some of these things that we're talking about. There's doubt in these truth propositions. I don't seem to have a lot of doubts at this juncture. I think my problem is more dread. Dread at the fact that, like, I hope in a God who is present. I believe this God is present, that this God cares, that this God is doing things of consequence. And yet, I'm looking around and there's lots of things to be sleepless about and worry about. And so the dread sets in. And so this is where the presence absence piece fits in, of like, how many people, even the ones who have got to that point where they believe in these things about God that we're talking about, and yet they don't experience God on that day-to-day level, that overwhelming presence and hope. Like, what do we do about that? And I don't have, like, I'm not asking a leading question. Like, this is something I'm actively working through in my own research, in my own writing, and so forth. So what do you make of this theme I'm drawing out from your work?
Yeah. I think, as to the theoretical side of things, I think some of this comes back to the Holocaust stuff, which I keep sneaking back into. But if you look at a lot of the theology that arose post-Holocaust, with like Moltmann and the suffering God, I think people try to evaluate that today and they critique it and they're like, classical theism. And I'm just like, you guys got to understand the context this arose in. A God who isn't suffering with us down here through this has almost nothing to say to what just happened. And I don't throw away classical theism, but I think there needs to be more of a sense of what the scriptures actually say about God with us. And so for the theoretical side of things, yeah, I think he's right here, suffering with us. But as for the practical, like, how do you actually feel that? I don't know. I've been feeling it a lot lately, and I think I stumbled into it. There was nothing I did. There was no work I undertook or some sort of practice. I didn't listen. I was tired and I was overwhelmed with family and work, and God just entered in. That's it. There's no advice. And maybe that's what grace is. Maybe it's precisely because there's nothing you can do. I think you can create conditions. I think, you can sort of set up the quantum vacuum and then wait for the spontaneity to occur. But the actual moment isn't something I've ever been able to capture. And I think maybe that might be a little bit what C.S. Lewis meant by it doesn't happen the same way twice ever. Because as soon as it happens more than once, you feel like you can recreate it and it becomes your thing. Right now, for me at this season, it's found through reading Tolkien, listening to Sufjan Stevens, and sitting on my hammock with a dog in the backyard. It's also, I encounter God through my children. I think they have fundamentally changed me, and maybe this is where I get too James Dobson-y. But I don't think of this as prescriptive. I think everyone's going to have different ways in which God enters in, as diverse as the universe itself is. But I don't think there's a 1, 2, 3 step. And I would be very suspicious of people who act like there is. So I do think you can do some things consistently over years to cultivate an openness and a waiting and a readiness for when God steps in. But I don't think we can summon him. We're not magicians, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of the last bullet point I had written down. It's a quote that you write. You say, God is bigger than we imagine, yet smaller than we could have ever dreamed. God meets us in both ecstatic visions of eternity and in the eccentricities of our time. God expands with the universe, yet shrinks to our door. And the question I had was, what are some of the ways that God shrinks to your door? And you just offered some. And I think that's such a powerful place to end, where you write this book on the 6 big movements in the story of God. And you do talk about the big stuff, but you do also get into the small stuff. You weave in this journey of Jonathan, and here you are now in your hammock with your dog, experiencing the presence of God with your children. And I would say that is where the dread dissipates for me, and I forget about it. I don't have a dog. My kids are desperate for a dog, but I got an 8 and a 5-year-old. We just got out of that toddler phase, so I don't want to introduce that phase back into our life. But there is something about them that causes the dread to dissipate, and maybe the stress to increase, but this stress too shall pass. I just want to say thank you for these reminders of God is in the big stuff, God is in the little stuff, and even when it feels like God is absent, he's still present, and you're just nudging people towards the presence of God. So thank you for your time, Jonathan. Thank you for this book you've written. I'd urge people to check it out, and I'll give you the last word. Any final thoughts? Any final things you want to talk about before how can people follow you? You have a podcast. Are you on social media and all that?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, and thank you for repitching the book, The Journey of God, at the end there, because usually I have to hold up the book and pitch it at the end to remind people, but you did it. So I don't sound like as much of a schmuck.
That's right.
Yeah. So the easiest way to do it is my website is jdlyonhart.com, or if you just Google my name, that'll come up. The podcast I do is called the Spiritually Incorrect Podcast. We cover all sorts of crazy stuff. Like we had an MIT professor come on to talk about why ghosts might be real. We had a NASA scientist come on to talk about how theology would change if we encountered aliens. We had Rupert Sheldrake come on to talk about whether telepathy is real. But then we also do some traditional subjects. We had Craig Evans to talk about the Gnostic Gospels. So we really just do whatever we find interesting, and
it's like Freakonomics for theology.
There we go. Yeah. I
just branded you guys.
You just did it. You did it. We've been trying to summarize it, but you did it, and Halloween's coming. I'm probably going to ask an exorcist to come on the show, because why not? Doesn't that sound fun? So yeah, that's the Spiritually Incorrect Podcast. You just summarized it great. Freakonomics for theology.
Yeah. We are past the hour, so we are hitting my hourly rate, so you can transfer me the money for my branding that I've done for you in promo. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. No, so that's where you can find me. And The Journey of God's on Amazon, or if you hate Amazon right now, Goodreads, any of the book thingies. So yeah.
Yeah, it's through IVP. So you can check it out on the IVP website and help Jonathan make more than $20. I'm kind of jelly
because Jonathan wealthy again.
Yeah, I haven't even made $20 on mine. I think I have to sell more than 504 copies of my book before I get 4% royalties. And I think maybe I'll hit that mark in like 40 years. So then I'll make $20 in like 40 years.
No, it's funny because people are like, "Oh, you got a book out. That must be helping out with the house." And I'm like, "No,
Nope.
are you crazy? It's
Yeah,
not
do you
even
know
meant-
how
it's-
academic publishing works?
Yeah.
Now let's get into the economics of that. That's an episode you should do, the economics of academic publishing.
Totally, 100%. Even the like bestsellers aren't making
Yeah.
much. So
Yeah, unless we're
Yeah.
talking advances. But
Yeah.
with your name, JD Lyonhart, like that's the type of author's name that gets a healthy advance for a book.
It was until JD Vance ruined the JD good name.
Yeah. Really compromised the SEO.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're getting into marketing and SEO, so maybe we wind it down. Thank you for your time, Jonathan. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This is lovely.